Good evening and welcome to Rugby Borough Council's Planning Committee meeting this Thursday the 9th of December. My name's Councillor Ian Picker and I'm chair of this committee. The meeting is being web streamed to the public through the Council's YouTube channel, and during the meeting, if you wish to speak, please use the push to talk button on the microphone in front of you. This will enable the camera to pan in your general direction. Before we begin the formal agenda, I am obliged to read out the following fire notice. There is no fire drill scheduled in the building this evening. If the fire alarm sounds, then please could I ask you to make your way out of the building, down the main staircase and out of the main doors of the Town Hall and congregate at the entrance to Caldycott Park. An officer of the council will give instructions as to when it is safe to return to the building. Moving on to the agenda, the first item of business is to approve the minutes of the meeting held on the 10th of November 2021. Could I ask members to indicate if they're happy for me to sign the minutes? I make that unanimous. Thank you. Okay. The second item is apologies for absence. Do we have any apologies, Democratic Services?
One apology for tonight's meeting from Councillor Eccleston, no substitute.
Thank you very much. Councillor Mrs Brown, is the microphone next to you on? Thanks. So, declarations of interest. Can I ask if there are any declarations of interest as defined by the Council's Code of Conduct for members under A, non-pecuniary interests? Okay. Under B, pecuniary interests? And C, notice under section 106 of the Local Government Finance Act 1992, non-payment of community charge or council tax. Excellent. So moving on to agenda item 4, which is applications for consideration. So the order in which each item will be dealt with. Firstly, the planning officer will speak to present the application, and following the planning officer's presentation, the applicant this evening will be invited to speak. The committee members will then be asked if they have any points of clarification from the speaker. Members of the committee will then go into debate on the application, asking relevant questions of the planning officer if necessary. A formal recommendation will be made and voted on, and the speaker will then be asked to leave the meeting following the item they're speaking on. The rules for public speaking: the speaker will have 3 minutes to make their presentation. They will be warned when they have 30 seconds remaining and will then be informed when the time has expired. Your presentation should then be brought to a halt and no extra time will be permitted, I'm afraid. The speakers should direct their presentation to amplifying the planning matters they've previously put to us for the benefit of the Planning Committee, and comments should be restricted to material planning considerations only. Any non-planning issues will be disregarded. The speaker should also not introduce any additional information that has not been previously brought to the Planning Authority's attention, i.e. introduce any late items that have not been suitably considered by officers and properly addressed in the officer's report to Planning Committee. And finally, no visual aids or handouts may be used, and no questions to officers or members will be allowed, and no members of the public are allowed to take part in the debate once the presentation has been given. So we will move on to the first and only item for consideration this evening, which is R21/0573, Flecknoe Farm Stud and Livery, and this is with Sam Burbidge.
So this presentation concerns Agenda 4 and is located at Flecknoe Farm, Stud and Livery, just off Flecknoe Village Road. The proposal seeks permission for the conversion and partial demolition of the existing equestrian barns to create 3 separate residential units on site. This application has been called to committee by Councillor Crane within the 21-day consultation period in order to be determined by the committee on the following grounds. Number 1, the proposal is contrary to policy GP3 as the creation of 3 dwellings will involve extensive rebuilding. Number 2, the proposed development is outside of the village boundary and is therefore in an unsustainable location. And number 3, this then creates reliance on car usage in remote rural areas which is not compliant with the local plan nor the NPPF. This aerial map shows the location of the business in regard to the local village and the surrounding countryside to the south, as you can see from the red arrow here. The application site as a whole comprises of 8.09 hectares. Planning permission was granted in 2019, which allowed for the relocation of the building and business to the land to the south. So as you can see from here, the site photos, on the left we have the front elevation, which is facing in a northern orientation. This can be seen from the Flecknoe Village Road. On the right we have the internal appearance, which shows the structural form at current. We then have more site photos here. So the rear elevation, which is in a southern orientation on the left, with the existing business inside, and then on the right we have the surrounding countryside views to the south. The proposal seeks the partial demolition of the existing three-bay arrangement. This would include the removal of the central bay to create an access through the site. As you can see from the top right photo here, the existing structure, the central bay, is proposed to be removed. The two outer bays will be retained, with the eastern only partially. As you can see on the bottom right photo, here on the eastern boundary is only a small proposed unit. This then proposes 1 3-bed and 2 4-bed units. The remainder of the removed structure will be hard-standing amenity and landscaping space, which is to the left area here. The photo to the left indicates the extent of the removal process to the existing structure, with area in red showing the extent of the removal of the existing building. So the proposed plans and elevations. On the top we have plot 1 and plot 2, which are both the 2 4-bed units. These are on the eastern boundary with the adjacent property of Oxfields. Underneath we then have the smaller plot 3, which is the 3-bed property on the western boundary with the adjacent property of Underwood. Then on the bottom we have the proposed front entrance from the northern orientation from Flecknoe Village Road. On the left we have plot 1, the rear elevation of plot 1. Here behind this proposed landscape we have plot 3, and then on the bottom right we have the proposed south facing view with plot 3 and plot 2's rear elevations. Then on the left here we have the proposed site plan. So we have plot 1 here, plot 2, plot 3, with the proposed central access road through the site. We have the bin store here, and then the proposed area of amenity and hard landscaping here. Plot 1, we have here the 4-bedroom property with the elevations on the right. This is the rear elevation of the property, side, and then the north orientation as well. Plot 2 is identical to plot 1 in terms of the size and layout, although it's in a different orientation. And then plot 3 is the smaller of the properties, and this is a 3-bed. So in terms of matters raised at a later date, regarding the original pre-application advice, the pre-application advice did give positive feedback to the proposal at an early stage. This was based upon discussions between principal officers. However, since the initial advice was given, the local authority has toughened its stance on dealing with applications located within the countryside. This is following a number of successful appeals on similar applications as stated within the officer report. Emphasis must also be made to the fact that pre-application advice is informal guidance only and is subject to change during the determination process, as per the caveat provided at the end of the original advice given. Regarding paragraph 80 of the NPPF, we acknowledge the compliance with paragraph 80C of the NPPF relating to the exceptions of isolated homes in the countryside. However, this is used as guidance to form the basis of the policies in our local plan. As a result, policy GP3 and its supporting policy in the form of GP1 and 2 supersedes its supporting text in the NPPF. Application R180911 was also made reference to by the agent. A similar application in the form of R180911 was approved in 2018. The application site is located outside the village boundary of Harborough Magna and was approved under paragraph 80 of the NPPF. However, it should be noted that this decision was based upon policies from the previous core strategy before the adoption of the current local plan and its supporting policies within it. These newly adopted policies have formed the determination of this current application at Flecknoe Farm. So, regarding the character and appearance, the structural survey produced, as discussed in section 1.6 of the officer report, concludes that the existing building is capable of conversion without extensive rebuilding. The proposal is of unique character in terms of what will be considered a standard dwelling house. However, the scheme has been designed in a way in order to retain and reuse as much of the existing structure as possible and to try and follow the specification for policy GP3. The proposal will comprise of cedar cladding facade with zinc seam metal roofing. It is considered by the planning officers that the character and design of this scheme was acceptable in terms of its compliance with the relevant design specifications as stated in Policy GP3. It is also considered that this proposal is compliant with SDC1 of the local plan and Section 12 of the NPPF. The scheme is also considered to enhance the immediate setting by opening up views on the surrounding countryside. Moving to the principle of development, the application site is located in the countryside and outside of the settlement boundary of Flecknoe. The Rural Sustainability Study 2015 ranks Flecknoe 16 out of 24 for the local needs settlements. This was based on an assessment of service provision. The proposal would be car dependent due to this low level of service provision. Therefore, the site is not considered to be within a sustainable location and would therefore contradict GP1 and GP2 of the local plan. So regarding local plan policy GP3, local plan policy GP3 supports the redevelopment of previously developed land where the particular criterion is met. Number 1, the building is of a permanent and substantial construction. Number 2, the condition of the buildings, its nature and location makes it for suitable adaptation. And number 3, the proposed use or adaptation can be accommodated without extensive rebuilding. However, it is considered that the proposal is compliant with aspects of policy GP3. However, supporting text in paragraph 3.20 states that this policy must be considered in conjunction with other policies in the plan, vis-a-vis GP1 and GP2. So with reference to appeal on site, a previous appeal on site for outline permission of new dwellings was dismissed on sustainability grounds due to the following reasons. Number 1, there will be a reliance on the usage of a private car which would hinder social integration between new and existing residents in the village. Number 2, it then goes on to say that the remoteness of the appeal site would mean that future occupiers of the proposed development will be unlikely to offer any meaningful day-to-day support to facilities and services without reliance on the private car. Number 3, the inspector concludes that the dwellings will be within a location with poor access to local services and facilities. And finally, number 4, this resulting in a proposal which would be in conflict with a national plan and policy framework. So in terms of highways issues, Warwickshire County Council Highways have confirmed that they have no objection to the proposal and that it is in accordance with policy D1 and D2 and appendix 2 of the local plan. As you can see from this table here, it outlines plot 1 to 3, the number of bedrooms proposed, and the SPD requirements for the parking spaces, and in all instances, the parking requirements have been met. In terms of residential amenity, on balance, it is considered that the proposal should provide no material impact on the amenity of the neighbouring dwellings. So in terms of planning balance and recommendation, planning balance, the location of the proposal outside of the village boundary of Flecknoe would result in a development which would see future residents being heavily reliant on the private car to access services and employment. This fails to mitigate and adapt to climate change and support moving to a low-carbon economy. As such, the proposal fails to comply with Section 2 of the National Plan and Policy Framework and local plan policies GP1, GP2 and GP3. It is, however, acknowledged that the scheme would bring the following benefits to the area. Number 1, provision of new dwellings to the area and its associated benefits to the local economy. Number 2, the removal of large sections of the existing building which would open up views from the site to the surrounding countryside land. On balance, the positive effects of a small-scale development over a long term will be limited, and the harm, however, in respect to the location of the application site will be in conflict with one of the framework's core planning objectives. It is considered that the proposal would not demonstrate sustainable development, and as such, significant weight should be given to this conflict. Therefore, the planning officer's recommendation is refusal due to the unsustainable location of the proposed development. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we now move to the speaker for this evening, who is speaking in support of the application, and that is Ms. Denise Murray. Mrs. Murray, you have 3 minutes.
Chair, members, good evening, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to you, which I do alongside my husband as the owner of Flecknoe Farm Stud. I would like to explain why we have submitted the application. The existing 3-bay barn has already been deemed not fit for purpose by the council. It is not economically viable for repair, as the cost of replacing the existing asbestos roof is far greater than the total cost of erecting a new single-bay barn that we already have planning permission for. This application is not being made merely for financial gain. all we seek to do is to generate enough funds to build the new, smaller and more environmentally friendly barn in order to provide better, safer and drier stabling for the horses. The removal of the very large central bay will not only significantly improve the appearance of the site, but it will open up the existing driveway leading to the stunning views to the open countryside beyond. This is acknowledged in your officer's report. In addition, our 3 immediate neighbours are all eager for us to get planning permission, as it will significantly improve the settings of their properties. These are all now residential, as the chopping block has recently been converted from commercial use to private dwellings. The proposed conversions would most likely be occupied by existing livery customers, a number of whom have already expressed an interest to us. This would reduce the number of cars visiting us daily, and given that most of our customers are either retired or professional people who work mostly from home, this would also help to reduce the number of vehicles. Since moving to Flecknoe in December 2005, we have invested our life savings and more into improving the facilities for the horses at Flecknoe Farm Stud. The aim of this proposal is to create a better environment for ours and our customers' horses, and to secure our business for our future and eventually our daughter's future when we retire. I currently run the business full-time, 7 days a week, 52 weeks of the year, and my husband, who is about to turn 70, is still working full-time to support us, in addition to helping me. I understand government and local planning policy aims to support rural businesses, so please, we ask you to do the same and consider our application very carefully, as refusal is effectively the end for our business, our livelihoods and our way of life. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can I ask committee if there are any questions for Mrs Murray? Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just ask the applicant, what do you intend doing with the properties? The complaints we've had, the objections we've had, are about them not being sustainable for residential use. Are you proposing they're going to be used for holiday lettings or some other purpose?
They are intended to be as private dwellings rather than holiday lettings. And as I said, we expect that a lot of our livery customers, or 3 of our livery customers, would want to reside there, which is why it would make it more sustainable, because they would then be living on site, and so less vehicles.
Councillor Mrs Brown.
Thank you. You mentioned that there were properties adjacent to yours which had been converted to residential from commercial. Had they previously been occupied, so commercial but partly residential as well, or were they just purely commercial?
Do you mean the property opposite?
Yes, you mentioned that there was some
That was,
close to you.
yes, that until recently it was a butcher's and catering business. That when it was built really to look like a house, and it has now, the business has moved away. It's now called the Old Chopping Block. So it's one private dwelling, but with, I think they've converted part of it to a flat, which now, so they now have a lodger as well.
So is that fairly recently?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just one question from myself. Obviously, the key challenge that has been identified by the officer's report is to do with sustainability and the transition we're currently undergoing to a low-carbon economy. What consideration, when you put forward the application, did you give towards trying to encourage low-energy or low-carbon uses within the property?
I understand that all new builds from next year will have electric charging points for cars. So I presume that they would be standard requirement anyway. We also, the new barn, we have also built in to have solar panels on all the roof so that we ourselves can become much more eco-friendly and a lot less dependent on electricity as we are at the moment. The only other point is that the flow of water through, at the moment, runs under the barn, which comes from the village. And if it was turned into private dwellings, then we would be able to open up that drainage and improve the flow and control of surface water, which currently runs under and sometimes through the barn, as it is at the moment.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any further questions for the speaker from committee? No? Okay, then we will move into debate on the application. Councillor Rabin and then Councillor Mrs Brown.
Thank you, Chair. I visited the site a week ago and just under a week ago, walked from the old chopping block to the village. It took me 2 minutes. So I don't consider the site to be isolated in any way. Compared to the existing business, traffic undoubtedly would not significantly increase, in my opinion. The change in the elevation is negligible, if not identical. And it's within, as far as I'm concerned, the boundary of Flecknoe, if not the parish boundary, at least Flecknoe Lane to the south of there, which is bordered, which is bordering a number of other properties. So I would move to recommend and approve the application.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Raven. So we've got Councillor Mrs Brown and then Councillor Sanderson and then Councillor Willis.
Thank you. I'd like to ask our planners, actually, hasn't a precedent been set by the conversion that's happened fairly recently to the property across the road?
Through you, Chair. Apologies. In terms of the application that was over the road, I'm not aware of all of the details through that. However, since the adoption of the local plan, the local authority have taken a tougher stance in terms of sustainability and the conversion of barns and things in these sorts of locations, and the fact that there is a high reliance on the motor vehicle. So the fact that in terms of whilst it is in short distance to Flecknoe village itself, it is outside and within the countryside, and there are very limited amenities within Flecknoe. Therefore, there'd be a reliance on the motor vehicle for residents who were to move there to get to facilities such as the doctors and pharmacies. Thank you.
Councillor Sanderson.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Can I just clarify this with the officer? It says in the report that there's a problem with regard, if it is permanent residential accommodation, should there be children and they need to get to local primary schools or the secondary school, are there any bus stops nearby that go to local school routes?
Through you, Chair. I believe it says in the officer report that there would be a considerable distance for children to have to travel to get to the local schools. And as far as I'm aware, there is no sort of provision in terms of bus route along that road. So that would be an issue in terms of children getting to local schools.
Councillor Willis and then Councillor Srivastava.
Thank you, Chair. I'm assuming that the primary reason, or the only reason for refusal, is the use of the motor car, the motor vehicle, and the sustainability. Last month, I moved approval for a planning application not dissimilar in terms that use of the motor car would be required if that application were to be recommended for approval. It was subsequently unanimously approved. In terms of what we're looking at now, and Councillor Rabin, I think, has captured succinctly the issues of vicinity to the village and the use of motor vehicle and sustainability. In light of that, I'm more than happy to second Councillor Rabin's approval for recommendation, for approval.
So Councillor Srivastava and then Councillor Gillies.
It's already been seconded. I was going to second the proposal as well. I support Councillor Rabin's proposal, and I think it opened up this space, and it will see improvement. I think it's covered most of things. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Gillies.
Yeah, thanks for that, Chair. Yes, it's a difficult one, this is, because when we look through the history of this site, it's got quite a bit of a planning history, which has accommodated a number of constructions over a period of time. When we look at the whole site within the Flecknoe area, it is a very open sort of landscape. It is sort of, very isolated. And although I've sat on this committee for a while and we've looked at applications within the Flecknoe area, and in particular in Nethercote nearby, where various approvals were given, we've got to bear in mind that, of course, the buildings do exist, whereas where we were looking at just outside of Woolston, that there's nothing on the site whatsoever. So there are buildings still existing on the site, whereas at Woolston there's nothing. So we've had to approve something there because for that very reason. But I've got to realise that planning policies move on, and they've moved on quite dramatically in the last year or two, and it's quite apparent that sustainability is actually a very key item into development. And I'm not quite sure, and it wasn't made clear, whether these proposals are going to be sold on the open market or whether they're going to be rented out. But clearly there's going to be an expense to do the work, and it makes me wonder whether or not the money that might be available to do that work might be also available to build the new barn that hasn't been constructed yet. So sustainability is key here. And when I read the letter from the applicant, and I read it, and I was very, very moved in one direction, but then I was moved back in another direction, because clearly we don't operate a precedent on this in this authority. We look at every application on its own merits. And I've got to be honest, after looking at all the P's and Q's, looking at, which way the balance is going to swing, I'm actually coming down on the side that it has to be refused, and I'm going to have to move refusal.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Gillies. I will come to you in one moment, Councillor Sanderson. Just on this one, I think Councillor Gillies has struck the nail on the head in that we have previously allowed applications on similar grounds, but those were prior to the local plan that we adopted more recently. So I do think that the officer has identified the key challenges here. I just want to come back on a comment that Councillor Rabin made. This application site is outside the village boundary. You may feel otherwise, but that is clearly defined. So I do have to agree with the officer.
No, Chair, so I did emphasise that although it was outside of the parish boundary, I considered it within the boundary of the road that other properties fall within as well.
Okay, that comment is noted. Councillor Sanderson, you had a comment?
Thank you, Chair. Can I second Councillor Gillies's proposal that we support the recommendation to refuse? Sustainability is a key and clear issue on this site. If these properties are sold on the open market, people move in with children and what have you, there's no connectivity to local facilities. I would have a stronger support if it was a holiday lets, which were lets, sort of during the summer when schools were not operating, for example. It would have some justification in terms of being rural diversification. In terms of comments about what was decided at other councils in other places, I won't comment on that because we only look at what's in front of us on Rugby Borough Council. Therefore, I will support the application for refusal on the grounds that this is not sustainable, and support both the ward councillor and the parish council in their proposition.
Thank you, Councillor Sanderson. Can I ask if there were any further speakers on this application? Councillor Mrs Brown.
Thank you. I'm concerned that I do understand the points about sustainability. I haven't got a problem with that at all, and I do appreciate all of that. My concern is with the acceptance that we can't ever consider remote builds, because that pushes developments towards overdeveloped urban wards all the time. And perhaps the fault is not with the location of the build, the fault is with the way in which we interact and connect with our rural communities. So it's thinking, you know, it's a bit cart before horse, isn't it, to say you can never build there because there is no way to get children to school. When if the need is there, we need to make that happen rather than just say you can't build there. Just a small point, but a fairly important one, I think.
Councillor Gillies.
Yeah, just a point to make. Of course, we know that a lot of rural communities are developing neighbourhood plans where the whole community has an opportunity to get together and voice an opinion where future development will be and what that development will turn out to be. And that's very, very important for rural people to work together to create that possibility of having development in their area that meets their needs. That's just what we want. We've been looking for that since probably 2002, when we were looking at sort of parish plans at that particular time. But the beauty of this planning system is that, you know, if we don't get our decision right here, we have the consequences to pay later on. But if we moved and approved the refusal, as the officer suggests, then of course the applicant does have that added opportunity to appeal that decision, where it doesn't happen the other way round. So, you know, that's why we work as we do.
Are there any further speakers on this application?
Excuse me, could I possibly just add one more point?
I'm afraid not, no. Sorry. Okay, so in terms of the application, the motions that have been moved, Councillor Rabin, could I just clarify that you're proposing that we move approval with delegation to the officers to draft conditions?
Yes, I am.
Okay, so that has been moved by Councillor Rabin and seconded by Councillor Willis. Could I ask all those in favour of approval to show their hands, please? 7. I make that 7. And all those against approval of this application? I make that 4, in which case that application is approved and officers will delegate conditions. Thank you very much, everyone. Okay, so we now come to agenda item 5, which is advance notice of any site visits. Are there any notifications of site visits?
Thank you, Chair. We have no notifications of site visits.
Thank you very much. So agenda item 6, which is the diversion of footpath R168Y, Northampton Lane, Rugby, and I believe this is with Marion.
Thank you, Chair.
Apologies, we're just having a brief delay with the IT, but hopefully that will load in a moment. Okay, I'm just going to adjourn the meeting for one moment whilst we try and get the IT issues sorted. welcome back everyone, and apologies for the brief delay. So we will now come to agenda item 6, which is the diversion of footpath R168Y, Northampton Lane, Rugby, and this is with Marion.
November 2020, Outline Planning Permission R16/2569 was approved for the demolition of farmhouse and outbuildings and the construction of warehousing, storage and distribution Class B8, a fire station and infrastructure on the allocated employment area of Rugby South West. Notwithstanding the detail of agenda, on the 10th of November 2021, Reserved Matters Submission R210789 was granted by Planning Committee for 51 square metres, Class B8 building and associated works, including highway. Part of the development requires the diversion of part of footpath R168Y along the eastern section of the application site. On the 13th of October 2021, an order under the provisions of Section 257 of the Town and Country Planning Act 1990 was made and advertised. The effect of the order is to stop at part of footpath R1681Y, shown by the bold black line on the plan, and create a replacement footpath as shown on the attached plan by the hatched line, which winds a bit down, and described in the attached order, which is part of the agenda. No objections have been received, and the recommendation for you is for the committee to therefore ask to confirm the public path diversion order as an unopposed order. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Given the context of this particular application and the previous applications we've approved, I'm happy to move approval from this from the chair. Are there any questions or comments? No? All those in favour? Okay, I make that unanimous, so that is indeed approved, unopposed. And finally, agenda item 7 is the delegated decisions 21st of October 2021 to 17th of November 2021, which I believe are for noting. Okay. That concludes the business of this evening's meeting, so thank you very much for everyone who attended. And IT, if you could stop the live stream, please.